Real quick, I also want to share with you about a local ministry in which we support here in the area as we dive back into Nehemiah chapter 2. There's a local ministry in which we support as a church as well, and I have partnered with them several times in leading student ministry. The ministry formerly was called NSP, National School Project, recently just rebranded and changed their name to Decision Point. And a really cool ministry, and they sent out their weekly newsletter to their email subscribers and supporters. And the subject line caught my attention, and it aroused my interest, like I try to do every week in the sermon. They teach us that. Catch your attention. And this email was celebrating the fact of hundreds of people around America joined in 40 days of prayer. And they thank them alongside of their givers and the bold students across America who proclaim the gospels. This is what they do, who proclaim the gospel to the next generation in their public schools. And their tagline is, till every student has heard. Till every student has heard, right here in Carroll Stream. And they go and they start these clubs, and it's pretty spectacular where you can give $75 and they get Chick-fil-A and hundreds of students show up, right? Yes, for the food, but also some are impacted by the gospel. And this subject line caught my attention. And it read this: Omar, a Muslim student, gives his life to Christ. The story hooked me like a largemouth bass nibbling for a worm. The story went on, and I had to keep reading it. And it read this. It says, God, thank you so much for making a way for us to have a relationship with you. All relationships take time, so show me how I can intentionally spend time with you in Jesus' name. Amen. The above prayer was from a student named Omar, whose name was changed for privacy. You see, Omar's friend, Jackson, he launched a Christian club at his school, and he invited Omar to attend one of their events. Omar was only interested for the pizza and the prizes at first, and when Omar had realized, and this is great strategy because I've done this too in student ministry, you save the pizza or the meal for last. When he realized that the pizza wouldn't be handed out until the end of the event and the message, he stopped paying attention. He put in his headphones, and when Jackson saw this, he prayed right there, God, would you let Omar listen and take off his headphones? 2 minutes later, Omar took off his headphones and started to listen. That day, Omar heard the gospel and began asking questions. Jackson gave Omar a Bible, and Omar began reading his Bible. Within a few months, he read through the first 9 books of the Bible and dozens of passages in the New Testament. Several months later, Omar prayed that above prayer and gave his life to Jesus. Amen. Because of a burden of a high school student to not just go with the current of high school and public school life, although there is great things there. He was determined to live his life on purpose. He was meant for more, that the gospel would go out into his school and people like Omar receive Christ. This has happened all across America, but what a cool story of courage, of burden, of faith and prayer that this cub leader would recognize that there is more to life than himself. But he offered up himself to be used by God to bring Jesus into the life of others and eventually give everlasting life. Dear friends, just like Jackson, people who are meant for more have a problem to solve, a conflict to resolve, and an opportunity to seize. That's what we talked about last week. And as we talked about this meant for more, you're meant for more, it starts with a burden. It starts with a holy discontent. It starts with having an area in your heart burning. It's keeping you up at night. It's consuming your awakening thoughts. And it's having an area that is being stirred in your spirit that you are concerned about and you want to see something change. In fact, oftentimes vision comes to us in times of desperation. A time of discontent, a time of heartache, a time of burden, at a time when we look at an area of our life as an individual. Maybe it is your marriage, a relationship or singleness or your job situation or temptation. And we say, God, I know it shouldn't be like this, so help me make it different. Or maybe it's in the life of our church. And it's some area where you want to make a difference, and we see the good news of Jesus spreading both here domestically and internationally, but there's a little more work to do here within our community. And in those times, desperation and discontent meet up. And that's where vision sometimes begins to birth. And many of you have been in that exact situation. Maybe it was when you started your company or when you got your last position and you were going to do something better than the person who was ahead of you. Or for some, it is going to be a complete step of faith. It's going to be a tiptoe. It's going to be a big step. It's going to be a large leap into a journey of unknowns, into a new role of endless opportunity, or tackling relational and conflict, painful relationship issues. Or maybe it's areas of your life in the past that hasn't been healed, or something that seemed to have been suppressed, and now it's time to rebirth that. I'll tell you what you do. You start with a yes. You slow down and you listen to God's voice, and you watch your hearts begin to melt for that very thing. As I said last week, I love this quote by Chuck Swindoll. He says this: God uses all manner of people in all manner of places doing all manner of work. So that burden is not too small. It does matter. And so this week, as we dive back into our series, the question we seek to answer this week is, well, what now? Or what do I do next? You see, Nehemiah from chapter 1, as we walk through, he had a burden. He gets this bad news that his city, his hometown, is now in ruins, and he has a pretty good job. He has a good career. He has stability. He has great benefits, and he is moved to go and love on people. Matter of fact, he goes and rebuilds the walls. And he felt so deeply. Chapter 1 says, and he felt deeply for their trouble and their shame. They were now exposed. They were now shameful for being God's chosen people. They are now getting beat down by enemies. He was troubled. He was shamed. He's seen the problems. He's seen the conflicts. But he also seen the opportunity. He felt deeply. But what he needed to do was see clearly. And so what he done was he fasted and prayed. He fasted and prayed for 4 months. And don't you dare think there was no mourning included in this. He was mourning. He was sorrowful. He was in pain. He needed to see clearly. And so during that time, he laid it all before the Lord. And hence, he was sad, which we'll read in just a minute. But then lastly, he planned carefully, and then he asked boldly. Steps toward your meant for more should require 2 things. Number one, before we begin, we must position ourselves before God. Whatever God's stirring in your heart, whatever those next steps, maybe it's a trial, whatever it is, you got to position it before God. Number 2, before we begin, we must develop a plan. Prayer and a plan. What do you mean? Look at with me in Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah chapter 2. 1 through 8, and I'll read the following verses and stop. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when the wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. You see, Nehemiah was a Jew who served as a cupbearer to this Persian king, and as cupbearer, he was in charge of protecting the king's cup, to make sure it was good, to make sure it wasn't poison, to make sure the king lived forever. And so he was the first line of defense. And Nehemiah was in position. He was trusted by the king, and he had honor before him. And I love this. Traditionally, the month of Nisan marked the beginning of the Persian year. And so for us, it would seem to be like a New Year celebration, and which we often set aside some accomplishments that we want to do. Or in this case, the king He would have a gentle heart, a generous heart towards the people. And so by this time, in the month of Nisan, people would come to the king and ask for these special favors. And the king would be very generous in granting those things. And so Nehemiah have decided, since this is a festive time, maybe I reveal what God is stirring in my heart. And he presented this conflict, but also an opportunity towards the king. And I love the text. It says, and when the wine was before him. 4 months of mourning, 4 months of praying, of fasting, and wondering God is next. The biblical scene opened with Nehemiah still functioning well in his job. He gave it all he had. Matter of fact, he says, I wasn't even sad in the presence of the king. He said, I was able to compose myself. I don't know about y'all, but I don't. My lip poke out. I get to crying and snot coming down. It's bad. But he carried this burden for months, and he was able to control it. Yet I believe, here's what I believe, that the Lord was the source of his strength. You're talking about 4 months. Man, we experience hardships and trials and in a week, and it eats at us. For 4 months, he does his job, and the Lord was his strength. But something is different now. Nehemiah reveals his sadness to the king. Look at verse 2. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very afraid, very much afraid. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city and the place of my father's grave lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? I love the text. I love narratives because you can have a little fun. The king goes to him, hey, Nizzy man, Nehemiah, my guy, what's up? As he sipped his drink and his wine. Remember, the wine is now served. And Nehemiah stands at attention. Oh, what do you mean, king? There's nothing wrong. Why is your face sad? Is there something wrong? And he says this. He said, you ain't sick. You're here doing your job. I don't see nothing wrong with you. You ain't sick. What can I see? And watch the phrase that he said. He says, this is nothing but sadness of the heart. Friends, sadness can creep in like termites over time and erode the foundation of our joy. Sadness can attack us like a bandit and steal our gladness. Sadness solicits when someone you love dearly is maybe suffering or sick. Or maybe you're going through a trial or a hardship and you feel there is nothing else you can do. Your sadness may come from disappointment, from deep hurt, from a letdown, from even betrayal, from a loss. And perhaps it gets our emotions sometimes a little bit unstable. Our countenance is downtrodden, unable to mask the different disappointment. Like, sadness is real. Maybe it's just me. We walk through the moments of sadness. It's the loss that can contribute to anything that makes us sad. And the truth is today, none of us in this room are exempt to sadness. Sure, we can try to play it off. We can try to deny the reality of being sad, but it comes around and it touches every single one of us. And at times, addressing our sadness is far more than just think positive thoughts. Amen. Or count backwards from 100. It's more than that. I love, he answers his sadness, yes, by positioning himself to God. Like, God knows everything. God knows all of us. God draws near in our pains, in our hurts, in our sadness, in our disappointments. God knows our next before we can even take the next step. God knows our future before we have another birthday. God handles our sadness. And he tells us, church, don't be troubled. although you are having some pain now or some trouble, the text says, man, I feel good this morning. He says, although you have trouble, I will be with you. I am near to you. I will lift up your bowed down head. And so Nehemiah does it in just a little bit. But this sadness thing is real. He says, this is sadness of the heart. And so I said to the king, King, live forever. And he then goes on and tells him what goes on, and he says, then I was afraid. Sadness sometimes can lead to fear or to being afraid and not being able to function well. Nehemiah says to the king, no, I'm good. Like you up in my Kool-Aid, man. What you talking about? And watch what happens next. Verse 4. Then the king said to me, and Nehemiah is writing this book, so what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's grave, that I may rebuild it. You want to see his meant for more is right there. That he rebuilds the walls that protects his city to where God's people would live and worship and live for him. That's his meant for more, that he would rebuild it. But he said to the king says, well, what are you requesting? He's afraid. And here's two reasons why he's afraid. First reason, number one, you see, in the presence of the king, in the presence of royalty, you don't show pain. You don't show your personal matters. This is disrespectful to be sad before the king. You have his presence. You have his pleasures. And why are you upset? Why are you sad? The king begins to think, well, what's going on? You don't like your job anymore? Did someone do something wrong to you? Or you don't respect me? Or are you conspiring against me? Hey, it ain't no PTO time in the kingdom. He's afraid. This is disrespectful to the king, but number two, he's also afraid because Nehemiah is getting ready to ask to take a risk that the king must give him permission and this request to go and leave and do his meant for more, to go and rebuild the walls of his home. My guy. All right. Yeah, this is a violation. This is a violation of what the king said. You got to go back over to Ezra chapter 4. Ezra chapter 4, verse 21. Watch this. Remember, Ezra and Nehemiah were at one point two books together until the 3rd century. It cut off. And so Ezra chapter 4, verse 21 says this, therefore make a decree that those men be made to cease, and this city may not be rebuilt until a decree I have made. So Ezra is now rebuilding the temple, and Nehemiah now wants to rebuild the wall, and this decree has already went out. And so he's standing in front of this king. He knows for sure that the decree went out. He's afraid because this burden in his heart. He got a question. He has a passion, and he has faith to get it done, and so he gives the question. And so he says, O king, live forever. And he says, I want to go and rebuild it. Watch verse 6. And the king said to me, with the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone? And when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. He gives them this royal courtesy, this greeting, just like who? Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys. Remember, before the king, O king, live forever. Of course, it's not a true and sincere expression, but it's a courtesy. And he is compelled to live for more and to bring restoration to the conditions of his native land. A place where God will reign, a place where God will live, and lives will be changed and hopes to be restored. And the king listens. He lays up a little bit. Matter of fact, I think the text is pretty interesting. It's the first time and the only time where it talks about, and his queen, his bae, was next to him. Now, it probably was a festive ceremony going on, and so she was there in his presence, but also it's pretty cool that God uses this scene Because as a queen to the king, if your cupbearer is leaving, what do you think she's feeling? Uh-oh, who's going to taste the wine? And if I get poisoned, right? Wait, you talking about kingdomship to my husband. And you want to leave, the king pulls up, he listens, and he says, so what are you wanting? And Nehemiah does this. You want to talk about in the middle of sadness? He says, I prayed to God of heaven. It's called a lightning prayer. And he smack dab in the middle of the king, beckoning his request, and he prays. But church, this should not be a surprise to us. Oh no, because you remember this man has already been praying for how long? 4 months. And this prayer is just an overflow. He's already sustained by prayer and fasting in God. This is now an overflow prayer. It's a repetition. It's a quick prayer. Lord, please help me now. I've said that several times when my dad, 6'5", was getting ready to warm my tail. Lord, help me now. He prays this quick prayer, Lord, help me now. And he defined his meant for more, that he would go and rebuild the city. Well, here's the question. How did the king react to Nehemiah's prayer? Well, can I tell you, prayer is powerful and planning is necessary. Nehemiah, in his months of hearing this horrible news and now seeking God, he has this burden, and he finally puts some feet to it because, look at the end of verse 6. So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a what? Time. The king was pleased because he had a plan. He put some feet to that very burden. God was giving it to him. And so he was able to give appropriate answers and fulfill the king's request. And King Artaxerxes now grants Nehemiah's request to return and rebuild the walls and the gates of the city. And Nehemiah travels to Jerusalem and he directs people. He builds his core team and his volunteer team to keep going. I got to close soon. All right. Watch verse 7 and 8. This is so good. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to the governors and the province beyond the river, and that they may let me pass until I come to Judah, and to the letter Ashpah, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked for. Watch this. Watch this. For the good hand of my God was upon me. Nehemiah requested, hey, you got to write me some letters. You got to tell these Persian places to let me through and allow access. And he said, you know what, matter of fact, as I'm going to build, all I got is a screwdriver and a hammer, so I'm going to need to go to Home Depot and Menards. And I kind of don't got the money for that. Would you help me out? And he gives him this credit card. And he says, you know what? While you're there, I'm going to do a little name dropping. You're going to need to talk to this person. When you want to talk about bold ask. He boldly asked. Because God had put a burden on his heart to see people come back to him. Let me tell you something, church. You never know how God will work in the hearts of others. You just never know. Time and time again, you've seen the faithfulness of God displayed through others. You never know how God will respond. And so the king granted, and he committed financially, politically, and military support so the walls can be built. And as the kids say these days, Talus, period. Period. Like it's done. God shows up, and it moves to the scene of a prophetic timeline. Here's what I mean by that. You don't have to read that, but go back to Isaiah 58, verse 12, and it reads this. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt, and you will rise up the foundations of many generations, and you will be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets, to dwell in. This is purposeful because one man moved in what God had called them to do. Brothers and sisters, that is you and I. That passion, that burden, that conflict, despite circumstances, fears, or worries, or failures, God has purpose with you, and he will see it through. Because here's why. God calls us to a marathon of faith. God calls us to a marathon of faith. It's not a quick fight. It's not a quick run. It's a marathon. And it may be 4 months. It may be 4 weeks. It may be 4 years. But what you are doing during that time of saying, God, what's next? With every passing moment, it's easy to lose focus and give up. And we hear the voices of all of the other commentary around us. Yeah, it's not worth it, or you should give up, or she's never coming home, or he's never going to be saved, or he's not a Christian, or nobody's going to go for that, or your kids are too far, or you'll never have a marriage like that. Nobody's going to listen. It's a lie. And as your vision comes into focus, God begins to stir. God begins to work, and it's easy to listen to the voice of him instead of others. But in the meantime, God has you where you are just because he wants you there. And while you are there, I think what we take away from this lesson today is while we are there, you pray, you plan, and you position yourself to be used for his purpose and to accomplish his desires in your life. Here's why. Because at the end of the verse, in verse 8, he goes out, he begins to build. We'll see next week how he goes and start building. And he says, before the good hand of my God was upon me. Like, can we look back sometimes, even in our hurt? Come on, worship team. Even in our hurt, even in our pain, say, you know what? God is still good. When we can't see a way, and it's dark, and it's dreary, and it's painful, and it's hard, and I don't know what this searching is. Should I leave? Should I stay? What's my next role? Or should I take this big step in our marriage or raising our kids, or maybe in my singleness of God, what's next? My meant for more is I'm going to plan, I'm going to pray, and I'm going to position myself to be used by God. Here's 3 things I want to give to you as we close. Is how do you sharpen your meant for more? Last week, you had a little time to discover that. What is it? Is it caring for others? Is it taking a big step of faith? Is it that conversation at work? Is it missions? Here's how you sharpen your meant for more. Number 1, you align it to God's will. You align it to God's will. God has one purpose for you and I. We see the New Testament. So we live out our faith and we go make disciples for him. We got to align all that we do in life. Lord, is this pleasing in your sight? Is this going to bring men and women to you? Sure, you're good at it. You're skilled at it. But man, what is the purpose behind it? You got to align it to God's will. Number 2, ensure that it advances gospel mission. Ensure that it advances gospel mission. Like, there is men and women out here who will die not knowing Jesus. And not that we can save them all. No. I don't want you to ever leave with that burden on your heart. Because they also have to make a decision. But every opportunity we have, man, we should live intentionally to show and live out who Christ is to us. Ensure it advances the gospel mission. And number 3, you got to soak it in prayer. You got to soak it in prayer. I don't know about you, that rainstorm last week caught me by surprise. I'm pulling into the garage, pulling for work, and it is coming down. Do I wait it out or do I go in? And I got soaked walking to the house. And I thought, Lord, in every decision that I make, what if I soaked all of those things in prayer like that? Like Nehemiah fell on his face and he fasted and he prayed and he prayed and he prayed. When he had nothing to do, he prayed. When he had something to do, he prayed. Church, God desires to hear from us. And God acts when we pray. He pours out his blessings and he opens up his hand and we walk away saying, hey, this burden is not mine, but it's now yours, God. So use me. Give me all you got to be the hands and feet. I pray this week as you go through the study, you get to the answer, what do I do next? And you position yourself before our good God. Let me pray for you. God, in many households, family situations, we're walking through this question right now. With a child, with a spouse, with a job, with a family member in our community and in this world, politically, God, the list goes on and on. And God, we simply don't know. But every day, God, we desire to be used to go out and to make a difference. So God, I pray that for the individual, that we do that, Lord, that you make it very clear that their next big step should be this. God, I pray where it's not clear, where it's hurtful, where it's frustrating, where it's hard, where there's sadness, where there's burden, where there's trouble. Man, God, may you come in like a refreshing wind. Lord, we don't want a small, still voice. No. We want a big voice from you to direct our paths, to order our steps, to heal our land, and to show us the way. And God, may we be grateful when you do that. May we give it all we got. May we not hold back. May we love well. May we lead well. And then how about for the church? Just like Nehemiah, as he asked boldly, God, how about for us at Gospelife? May these doors be swinging open for gospel impact and opportunity. May our statement of faith, may who we are as people of love bring men and women, boys and girls into knowing you. Cover us, Lord. Keep us, Lord, I pray. That the work of the ministry, that the work of the gospel and change go forward in transformation. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.